In the summer of 2022, Miami's vibrant streets concealed a web of secrets, lies, and deadly jealousy. What started as a seemingly innocent friendship between neighbors spiraled into one of the most perplexing and shocking true crime cases the city had ever seen. Two couples living side by side whose intertwined lives led to an unspeakable tragedy. Meet Thomas Clark and Ray Danford. Thomas, a successful bank manager, had always been a man of structure, following the rules to a T until Ray moved in next door. Ray, the charismatic insurance agent with a magnetic smile and a wild side, seemed to live life without any boundaries. What started as casual conversations across the picket fence soon turned into something much deeper, much more dangerous. Then there were the wives. Tamara Kraus, Thomas's partner for nearly a decade, and Christina Steen, Ray's stunning wife, who worked as a flight attendant. The four of them seemed like the perfect picture of suburban bliss. But beneath the surface, hidden desires and unspoken tensions began to brew. One steamy Miami evening, after too many drinks at a neighborhood barbecue, everything changed. What had once been innocent flirting turned into something far more intimate, an invitation that would forever alter their lives. Thomas and Ray had been growing closer in secret for months, their once casual friendship turning into a clandestine romance. But that night, something shifted. It wasn't just about them anymore. Tamara and Christina, oblivious to the affair between their husbands, were drawn into a new dynamic, a swinger arrangement that no one had predicted. At first, it seemed exciting, a thrilling escape from the mundane routine of their marriages. But it didn't take long for jealousy to creep in. Thomas began noticing the way Tamara looked at Ray, her eyes lingering just a little too long. And Ray? Well, he wasn't just interested in Thomas anymore. His attention was shifting, now focused on Christina, his own wife. But Thomas, he wanted all of Ray. The jealousy festered, and what had once been an open and exciting relationship quickly became toxic. Secrets already thick in the air multiplied. Who was loyal to whom? And more importantly, who would snap first? But the real twist came when one of them turned up dead. One hot summer night, Tamara Kraus was found dead in her bedroom. The police were called to the scene, and what they uncovered shocked the entire neighborhood. Her body was discovered with clear signs of a struggle, and the immediate suspect was her husband, Thomas. But things didn't add up. Thomas seemed genuinely distraught, and there was no clear motive. Why would he kill his wife when their relationship was seemingly perfect? Or was it? That's when the police discovered the tangled mess of relationships between the four. As they dug deeper into the lives of these neighbors, they began to uncover the truth about the swinger arrangement and the intense jealousy that had been festering behind closed doors. Was it Thomas, consumed with jealousy over Ray's growing interest in Tamara? Or could it have been Ray, frustrated with how complicated things had become? And where did Christina fit into all of this? The deeper investigators looked, the more twisted the story became. They soon discovered that Tamara had been keeping secrets of her own, private messages between her and Ray, where she hinted at wanting to leave both Thomas and Christina behind. She wanted a new life with Ray. As the police pieced together the events leading up to Tamara's death, a new suspect emerged, Christina Steen. Had she discovered her husband's affair with Tamara? Had jealousy driven her to commit the unthinkable? Or was there something even more sinister at play? What started as a steamy affair had spiraled into a deadly game of manipulation and betrayal. And the closer investigators got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. Someone was lying, and someone was about to pay the ultimate price. As the investigation into Tamara's death deepened, the cracks in the seemingly perfect relationships grew wider. What the police found next sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Hidden in Tamara's phone were messages, explicit, intimate messages between her and Ray. The discovery rocked Thomas to his core. He had suspected something was happening, but now he had undeniable proof that his wife had been unfaithful. Thomas had always been a man of control, someone who prided himself on keeping his emotions in check. But in those moments, sitting in the police station, reading those texts, something in him snapped. He had loved Ray, trusted him. The affair with Ray had been their secret, something they both cherished, despite its dangerous nature. But this betrayal with Tamara, it was too much to bear. Detective Collins, the lead investigator, began to sense that Thomas was holding something back. His reactions were too calculated, too controlled. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew he wasn't telling her the full story. And then there was Ray, who had gone completely silent after Tamara's death, refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Why wasn't he defending himself? Why wasn't he doing everything to clear his name? Christina, meanwhile, became a wild card in the investigation. She seemed devastated by the death of her neighbor and friend, but the detectives noticed something strange in her demeanor, an eerie calm that didn't quite fit the situation. They started digging into her background and discovered that Christina had been suspicious of Ray for months. She had even hired a private investigator to follow him, suspecting that he was cheating on her. But what the PI had uncovered was much more than just an affair. It was the tangled, sordid web of relationships that had led to Tamara's death. The investigators found notes from Christina's PI detailing the secret relationship between Thomas and Ray, but there was something even darker lurking in the shadows. A financial motive began to surface. Christina had been working with Ray to secretly siphon money from both Thomas and Tamara, using their emotions to manipulate them into vulnerable positions. Could this have been the real motive for the murder? As Detective Collins dug deeper, she began to suspect that Christina wasn't just a scorned wife, she was much more dangerous. The investigation shifted focus. Collins started to believe that Christina, not Thomas, may have been behind the murder. And the closer she got to the truth, the more unsettling the details became. Collins uncovered that, in the days leading up to Tamara's death, Christina had taken out a life insurance policy on her husband Ray without his knowledge. The policy was worth millions, and with Ray increasingly entangled in this messy web of deceit, Christina stood to gain a fortune if something happened to him. Was the plan to frame Ray for Tamara's murder, collect the insurance, and walk away with everything? It certainly looked that way. But Christina wasn't the only one with secrets. Ray, once a confident and manipulative man, began to spiral. He had always been in control, always been the one pulling the strings. But with the walls closing in on him, he realized that Christina had been playing him from the start. He had thought he was using her to get to Thomas and Tamara, but in reality, she had been using him all along. The dynamic between the four had shifted so dramatically that no one was quite sure who was telling the truth anymore. Ray, afraid for his life, reached out to Detective Collins with a chilling confession. He admitted to having an affair with both Thomas and Tamara, but what he revealed next changed everything. "I didn't kill her," Ray said, his voice shaky, "but I know who did." Collins leaned in, her pulse quickening. "Who?" Ray's eyes darted around the room. He was clearly terrified. "Christina, she's been planning this for months. She set me up." At first, Collins wasn't sure whether to believe him. Ray was a liar, a manipulator, but something about his fear seemed genuine. As Ray explained the twisted web of lies, Collins started to piece together a horrifying picture. Christina had orchestrated everything from the affairs to the financial deception. And now, with Tamara dead and Thomas a suspect, she was preparing to disappear with all the money. But Christina wasn't done. She had one final move to make, and it was more sinister than anyone had imagined. That night, as Collins raced to find Christina before she could flee the country, a fire broke out at Thomas's house. The flames consumed everything in minutes, and by the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. Inside the burning home, they found a body. The fire at Thomas's house was a turning point, an explosion of chaos in an already twisted case. As investigators sifted through the charred remains, they discovered that the body inside wasn't Thomas, but Ray. The man who had been at the center of the tangled web of lies and betrayal was now dead, leaving more questions than answers. Had Ray been lured to the house? Had he been trying to confront Thomas or perhaps flee with Christina? The more the investigators dug, the more it became clear Ray's death was no accident. Detective Collins stood at the crime scene, staring at the remnants of the house that had once been a symbol of success for Thomas and Tamara. Now it was nothing but ashes and secrets. The discovery of Ray's body only deepened the mystery. If Christina had orchestrated Tamara's death, could she have also been behind Ray's? Or was there something even darker at play? Collins couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been a setup from the start. The autopsy revealed that Ray hadn't died in the fire. He had been killed beforehand, his throat slit in a brutal attack. This was no accident, no desperate attempt to cover up a crime. This was cold-blooded murder. Collins' mind raced as she pieced together the timeline. Ray had been working with Christina, but at some point the alliance had broken. Could it be that Christina had eliminated Ray because he had become a liability? Or had Thomas, in a fit of rage and betrayal, turned on his former lover? Christina, meanwhile, had gone completely off the grid. She had withdrawn all the money from the joint account she shared with Ray and disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but suspicion and devastation. Collins knew she had to find Christina before anyone else ended up dead, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Christina had covered her tracks well, but Collins wasn't giving up. As the investigation intensified, a disturbing new theory emerged. Collins began to suspect that Tamara's death had never been about love or revenge, it had been about money. The life insurance policies, the secret bank accounts, the offshore transfers, it all pointed to one thing: a calculated plan to eliminate those who stood in the way of a massive financial windfall. And the mastermind behind it all? Christina. But just when Collins thought she had figured it all out, a new player entered the game. Lily Danford, Ray's estranged sister, flew into town after hearing of her brother's death. Lily was different from the others, calm, composed, and far more perceptive than she let on. She had always known that Ray was living a dangerous life, but she had stayed out of it, keeping her distance. However, with Ray dead, Lily had one goal in mind: justice. Collins and Lily met in the quiet confines of a local diner, the dim lighting casting shadows over their conversation. Lily, her eyes sharp and focused, laid out her suspicions. "You're looking at this all wrong," Lily said, her voice steady. "Christina wasn't working alone. She had help, someone with connections, someone with influence. That's why you haven't been able to find her." Collins raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Who?" Lily leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Thomas. He's been pulling the strings this entire time." Collins felt a chill run down her spine. Thomas? But how could that be? He had been a victim just like the others, or so she had thought. But as Lily laid out her theory, the pieces began to fall into place. Thomas had always been the quiet one, the one who seemed too perfect, too composed. But behind the facade of a grieving husband and a betrayed lover, there was something far more sinister lurking. Lily believed that Thomas had orchestrated everything from the start. He had used Ray and Christina as pawns in his game, manipulating them into killing Tamara so he could collect the insurance money and disappear with his wealth intact. "He's not as innocent as he looks," Lily said, her voice filled with certainty. "He's been planning this for years." Collins' mind raced as she considered the possibility. Could Thomas really have been the mastermind behind it all? It would explain so much: the way he had seemed oddly calm after Tamara's death, his strange behavior during the investigation, and now, the fire. Had he staged Ray's death to cover his tracks? But Collins wasn't convinced. There was still one piece of the puzzle missing, one thing that didn't quite add up. As she left the diner that night, her thoughts swirling, Collins received a call that sent her heart racing. It was Thomas. He had been found, alive. But his story was far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Thomas had been found at a remote cabin deep in the woods outside of Miami. He was disheveled, bruised, and barely coherent when the authorities brought him in. The cabin had been raided after a tip-off from an anonymous source. As Detective Collins arrived to interview him, her mind was already spinning with the possibilities. Thomas, the man Lily had implicated, was now in custody, but what was his version of events? Sitting in the dimly lit interrogation room, Thomas looked broken, his once carefully groomed appearance now ragged and wild. His eyes darted around the room as if he was still expecting someone to come after him. Collins sat down across from him, laying out her notes but keeping her expression neutral. She had to play this carefully. "You've been hard to find, Thomas," Collins began, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. "Care to tell me what you've been up to?" Thomas leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. "You have no idea," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I've been running for my life. They're after me." Collins narrowed her eyes. "Who's they? Who are you running from?" Thomas swallowed hard and looked around the room as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "Ray and Christina," he said, barely audible. "They wanted everything. Tamara's money, the house, everything. It was all a game to them, but it got out of control. I thought I could stop it, but I was wrong." Collins couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ray was dead. How could he be chasing Thomas? Was this some kind of ploy? She pressed harder. "Ray's dead, Thomas. We found him in the fire at your house. So what are you really trying to tell me here?" Thomas's face turned pale. "You don't understand. That wasn't Ray. I mean, it was, but he wasn't acting alone. Christina's still out there. She's the real danger. She's been manipulating everyone from the beginning. Ray thought he was in control, but he was just another pawn in her game." Collins listened carefully, but something about his story felt off. She had always suspected that Christina was involved, but was Thomas really as innocent as he claimed? She had seen too many cases like this before, cases where the mastermind plays the victim until the very last moment. And yet, something about the fear in Thomas's eyes seemed genuine. Why would Christina go through all this trouble? Why set everything on fire, kill Ray, and leave you out here to rot? Collins leaned forward, her voice sharp. Thomas wiped a hand across his face, his fingers trembling. "Because she's ruthless. She saw a way to get everything she ever wanted, and she used Ray to make it happen. I thought I could trust her, but when Tamara got suspicious, things spiraled out of control. I didn't kill my wife. I loved her. But they framed me. Ray and Christina made it look like I had something to do with it. And now they're coming for me." "Then why didn't you go to the police? Why run?" Thomas's voice grew more desperate. "Because I knew no one would believe me. They'd think I was part of it, and I thought if I could just get away, I could figure out how to expose Christina. But she's always one step ahead. She's got contacts everywhere. She's dangerous, detective." Collins studied him for a long moment, watching every twitch, every flicker in his eyes. Was this the truth, or was it just another lie woven into the mess of this case? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her colleague, Agent Ryan, an update that sent a chill down her spine. Christina had been spotted at the Miami International Airport boarding a private plane bound for a location somewhere in the Caribbean. Collins felt her pulse quicken. Was Christina making her escape, or was this part of some larger plan? She had to act fast. Leaving Thomas in the custody of the station, she grabbed her jacket and headed for the airport, her mind racing. As she arrived at the airport, she was met with chaos. Agents and officers swarmed the terminal, but there was no sign of Christina. The plane had taken off minutes before Collins had arrived. She cursed under her breath. It felt like the case was slipping through her fingers. How had Christina known to escape at that exact moment? And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from an unknown number. "You'll never catch me." See double quote. Collins' heart pounded. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at the station, Thomas sat in his cell, his mind racing with fear. He had told Collins everything he could, but he knew that as long as Christina was out there, he wasn't safe. No one was. Suddenly, the door to his holding area creaked open, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. Thomas squinted through the dim light, and his blood ran cold. It was Marcus. Marcus Greer, Christina's right-hand man, stood in the doorway, a cold smile on his face. He had slipped past the guards, as he always did, using his charm and connections to get wherever he wanted. And now, here he was, standing in front of Thomas, the man who had thought he could escape. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice dripping with malice. "You didn't think you could run from us, did you?" Thomas's mouth went dry. He backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. "Please," he begged. "I didn't mean to cross you. It was all Christina's idea." Marcus took a step forward, his hand slipping into his coat pocket. "You see, Thomas, that's where you made your mistake. You underestimated just how far we're willing to go to clean up loose ends." And before Thomas could scream for help, the sound of a silenced gunshot echoed through the room. Christina watched from the balcony of her secluded villa in the Caribbean, a glass of wine in her hand, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. The ocean waves crashed against the rocks below, a soothing soundtrack to the chaos she had orchestrated. Everything had gone exactly as planned. Ray was dead, Thomas was out of the way, and the authorities were chasing shadows while she had slipped away untouchable. She swirled the wine in her glass, thinking back to how it had all begun. Ray had been an easy target, a weak man, desperate for excitement in his mundane life, a puppet waiting to be strung along. She had seen it the moment they met at that charity event. He was drawn to her like a moth to a flame, and she had played the role of the perfect, seductive partner. She had made him feel powerful, like he was in control, but in reality, every move had been hers. It wasn't just about the money or the power for Christina, it was the thrill of manipulation, of controlling everyone around her like chess pieces on a board. She had played them all, Thomas, Ray, even poor Tamara. And now, with them out of the picture, there was no one left to challenge her. Or so she thought. As Christina turned back toward the villa, her phone buzzed on the table. She frowned. No one had this number except a very select few, and most of them were either dead or loyal to her beyond question. She picked up the phone and glanced at the message. It was from an unknown number, but the words chilled her to the bone. "It's over. We know everything. See double quote." Her blood froze. See? That could only mean one person. Detective Collins. How had Collins found her? How had she managed to trace her steps? Christina's mind raced, trying to piece together how her perfect plan could have unraveled. She had been so careful, so meticulous in covering her tracks. There was no way Collins could have known about the offshore accounts, the false identities, the network of corrupt officials she had on her payroll. Or could she? Suddenly, Christina's world didn't feel as secure as it had just moments ago. She poured herself another glass of wine, trying to steady her shaking hand. There was no way Collins could have reached this far unless there was a traitor. Someone within her inner circle had to have turned on her. But who? Before she could finish the thought, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. She grabbed a knife from the table, her pulse quickening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady but cold. She wasn't afraid of confrontation. After all, she had orchestrated much worse. But this was different. This felt too personal. The door creaked open, and to her shock, Detective Collins stepped into the room, her gun drawn, her expression calm but intense. Behind her, another figure emerged from the shadows. Marcus. Christina's heart skipped a beat. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her confidence wavering for the first time. Marcus gave her a sly smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Did you really think you could get away with all of it? Ray, Thomas, Tamara? You crossed too many lines, Christina. You made too many enemies." Christina took a step back, the knife still in her hand. "You were with me, Marcus. You helped me with everything. You're just as involved as I am." Marcus chuckled darkly. "No, Christina, I was playing a different game all along. You weren't the only one pulling strings." Before Christina could respond, Collins stepped forward, her gun now trained directly on her. "It's over, Christina. We have everything we need. The accounts, the murders, the cover-ups. There's nowhere left for you to run." Christina's mind raced, searching for a way out, but the walls were closing in fast. She glanced at Marcus, her eyes pleading. "Marcus, please, we can fix this. We can disappear. Start over somewhere else." But Marcus's smile faded, replaced by cold indifference. "This was never about starting over, Christina. This was about control. You thought you could manipulate me like you did Ray, but I've always been a step ahead." Collins moved closer, her voice firm. "Drop the knife, Christina. You're done." For a moment, Christina considered lunging at Collins, considered going out in a blaze of glory rather than facing the humiliation of being captured. But something in Colin's eyes told her it would be futile. There was no escape. Slowly, Christina let the knife slip from her hand, clattering to the floor. She raised her hands in surrender, the weight of her defeat settling over her like a dark cloud. As Colin stepped forward to cuff her, Christina shot one last glance at Marcus. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I built you. I made you powerful." Marcus leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. "You built nothing. You were just a pawn like everyone else. And now you're going to rot for it." Christina's eyes burned with rage as Collins led her out of the villa, the Caribbean sunset casting long shadows across the floor. Everything she had built, everything she had orchestrated, had come crashing down in the blink of an eye. As the car sped away, taking Christina to her inevitable fate, Marcus remained in the villa, standing by the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. He had won. He had outplayed them all, even Christina. The empire was his now. Everything she had worked for, everything she had schemed to achieve, was now under his control. And no one would ever know how deeply Marcus had been pulling the strings all along. In the days that followed, the news of Christina's arrest spread like wildfire. The trial was a spectacle, with every sordid detail of her manipulations laid bare for the world to see. Ray, Thomas, Tamara, all pawns in her twisted game of power and control. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The mastermind had been brought down, her empire crumbled. Detective Collins, though relieved to have solved the case, couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Marcus had walked away from the whole ordeal unscathed, and while she couldn't prove it, she knew he had played a much larger role than anyone realized. But for now, the case was closed. Christina would spend the rest of her life behind bars, her reign of terror finally over. Or so they thought. As Collins walked away from the courthouse, she received one final message on her phone. No name, no number, just a single chilling line. "It's never really over."